What happens when a royal sits down for one of the most prestigious interviews in America, only to walk out in fury? Prince Harry's highly anticipated 60 minutes interview with Anderson Cooper began with warmth and composure. But as questions deepened, the tension cracked wide open. This wasn't just an interview. It was a slow-burning collision between a seasoned journalist and a defiant royal spiraling into one of the most unforgettable walkouts in television history. Prince Harry entered the silent, softly lit studio with a measured breath, the kind that signaled not calmness but a delicate attempt at controlling something boiling underneath. The studio's atmosphere was deceptively peaceful. A muted gray backdrop, two chairs angled slightly toward each other, a coffee table with untouched glasses of water, and the faint hum of overhead lights. Anderson Cooper, composed as always, stood up as Harry approached. The handshake was polite but not warm, firm but not firm enough to disguise the tension vibrating subtly between their palms. Producers exchanged quick glances. Everyone expected a bold interview, but no one predicted the next 30 minutes would become a masterclass in controlled implosion. The cameras started rolling quietly, capturing every flicker in Harry's expression. Anderson began with his usual soft opening, his voice rooted in calm professionalism. He asked about Harry's life in California, about the weather, about adjusting to the American pace. Harry answered with a composed tone, but something felt rehearsed, almost mechanical, as if each word passed through a filter of defensiveness before leaving his mouth. When Anderson asked about fatherhood, Harry's face softened for a moment, but the softness vanished the moment the conversation edged toward anything related to his past in the UK. There was an unmistakable shift in his posture. His shoulders tightened, and his jaw locked in a way that suggested he was preparing for battle, even if the war hadn't begun yet. Anderson, sensing the energy change, leaned slightly forward. "Let's talk about your decision to step away from royal duties," he said carefully. Harry inhaled sharply. "I didn't step away," he corrected, a hint of irritation sneaking into his voice. "I stepped forward, away from a system designed to suffocate." Anderson nodded, maintaining neutrality. But Harry continued, unprovoked. "People think I left because of pressure. They don't understand I was never allowed to be free." The sentence hung in the air, heavier than expected. Anderson asked, "Do you believe your family misunderstood you?" Harry's eyes narrowed just enough to reveal a flicker of resentment. "Misunderstood? No. They understood me perfectly, that's the problem." The tension, subtle at first, began to simmer. The crew behind the cameras stood motionless, watching carefully, sensing that this conversation was moving towards something unprecedented. Anderson shifted direction, easing toward Harry's memoir and the recent controversies. The questions were direct but fair, phrased with the precision Anderson was known for. But Harry responded with surprising hostility, as though every inquiry was an attack. When Anderson mentioned the criticism Harry faced regarding some inconsistencies in his stories, Harry let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, inconsistencies," he said, leaning back. "Funny how everyone becomes an expert on my life when they've never lived a day of it." Anderson didn't react. His expression remained professional, but inside the room the air grew colder. Harry continued, "People want details, they want gossip, they want excuses to judge, but they don't care about the truth, they never have." Anderson allowed a brief silence before responding. "Then tell us your truth," he said, voice steady. "That's why you're here." Something about the phrasing made Harry's expression change. His lips tightened. "My truth has already been told," he said. "Whether people choose to listen is their problem." Minutes ticked by, each one adding another layer to the growing friction. Harry grew increasingly animated, gesturing with his hands, repeating the same grievances about the press, the palace, the system, and anyone who he felt had wronged him. Anderson stayed composed, steering the conversation gently but firmly. The more composed Anderson remained, the more agitated Harry became. Each calm question from Anderson seemed to irritate him more than a harsh one might have. And then came the turning point. Anderson asked some journalists, and even some members of the public, Feel that despite leaving royal life to seek privacy, you continue to share very personal details publicly. How do you respond to that contradiction? The word contradiction landed like a blow. Harry's eyes widened, and the irritation he had carefully kept beneath the surface began to show openly. Contradiction, he repeated. No, that's not a contradiction. That's an accusation. Anderson kept his voice level. It's a question, he clarified, but Harry wasn't hearing nuance anymore. You're implying I'm a hypocrite. He snapped. You're putting words in my mouth. Anderson's tone never wavered. I'm asking how you reconcile it, he said calmly. But calmness at that moment acted like gasoline. Harry leaned forward, voice rising slightly. I left because I was suffocating. I speak because people try to silence me. I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. And people like you. He stopped himself, but it was too late. He had crossed into a realm of raw emotion that no longer resembled a structured interview. The spell of professionalism cracked. The room went still. Anderson waited, allowing Harry space to breathe. Instead, Harry exhaled sharply through his nose. Let me ask you something, he said suddenly, flipping the dynamic. If your family had treated you the way mine treated me, would you stay silent? Would you sit pretty and pretend everything was fine? Anderson replied quietly, No one is asking you to stay silent. I'm asking about the choices you've made and how you justify them. Harry shook his head, jaw clenching again. You're twisting everything, he muttered. Anderson, trying to maintain the interview's direction, asked his next question carefully. There are reports that some of the incidents you've described were disputed by those involved. Would you say every memory in your book is entirely accurate? Harry's reaction was immediate and explosive. Memories are memories, he said loudly. Everyone remembers differently, but this obsession with perfect accuracy is ridiculous. You want my trauma to be footnoted and time-stamped. Anderson answered gently, No, I want clarity. Harry scoffed. Clarity, or ammunition. The atmosphere turned electric. A producer subtly signaled Anderson to soften the next transition, but Harry wasn't giving space for softening anymore. He became the aggressor, his voice sharp, his answers fragmented. I'm tired, he admitted, not in exhaustion but in hostility. I'm tired of being dissected. I'm tired of being analyzed by people who don't understand what it's like to be hunted since birth. Anderson asked, Do you feel hunted even now? Harry's voice cracked, not with sadness, but with an anger that had grown too big to contain. Yes, he said, every moment. But then came the moment the interview crossed the point of no return. Anderson asked a question that had been approved pre-interview, a question Harry already knew was coming. There have been claims, Anderson said carefully, that Meghan influenced many of your decisions. Some critics say you're being guided more by your partner than by personal conviction. How do you respond to that? Harry froze. His expression hardened instantly. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair and stared at Anderson in disbelief. So that's where you're going, he said quietly, but the quietness was more threatening than shouting. You're blaming my wife now, is that the angle? Anderson raised a hand slightly, not defensively but as a gesture of calm. I'm not blaming anyone, he said. I'm asking you to address what people are discussing publicly. Harry's voice rose again. People are discussing it because journalists like you keep pushing that narrative. Anderson replied, It's important to ask the questions people are asking. Harry shook his head, laughterless. No, it's important to ask the truth, but you're doing neither. A long silence followed. Harry's breathing was heavier, his frustration palpable. The crew shifted uncomfortably. Anderson tried to proceed with professionalism, but the tone had soured beyond repair. Harry, he said softly, I'm not here to attack you. Harry replied, then stop acting like it. The meltdown had begun. Harry removed his microphone slightly, adjusting it as though preparing to leave. Anderson attempted to pull things back. If we could continue, he began, but Harry interrupted sharply. Continue what? You want to paint me as unstable, as dramatic, as some lost prince who can't think for himself. Anderson kept his voice steady. I haven't suggested any of that. But Harry wasn't listening. You're just like the British press, he said, pointing a finger toward Anderson. The comparison was harsh, almost an insult in Harry's world. Anderson blinked, blindsided but still controlled. "I'm asking fair questions," he insisted. "You agreed to discuss these topics." Harry stood abruptly. The sudden motion startled even the cameras. "I agreed to an honest interview," he snapped. "Not an interrogation." Anderson remained seated, looking up calmly. "No one is interrogating you," he said. "We're having a conversation." Harry shook his head. "This is an attack." The producers froze. No one dared intervene. Harry's voice cracked again, not with vulnerability but with fury held back by threads. "I won't sit here and let you twist everything I say. I'm done." Anderson spoke one last time. "You're free to walk out if you want, but I'd prefer we finish this respectfully." Harry stared at him, eyes burning, then picked up his microphone pack, ripping the clip from his shirt. "Respect," he repeated. "You don't get to talk about respect." He began walking toward the edge of the set, the cameras capturing every step. A producer finally rushed forward, whispering softly, "Harry, please, we can cut that part," but Harry brushed past him. Anderson remained seated, watching silently, disappointment flickering across his face for the first time. The crew avoided eye contact with each other, unsure how to salvage what had just collapsed. Harry reached the exit, pausing only long enough to turn back toward the room. His final words were quiet, but laced with venom. "This interview was a mistake," he said, "a massive mistake." And then he walked out, leaving behind a studio drenched in stunned silence. Anderson finally exhaled, leaning back in his chair as the producers stepped forward, unsure whether to chase after Harry or cut to commercial. The cameras continued to roll, capturing a moment that would soon become one of the most talked about walkouts in television history. Outside the studio hallway, Harry's footsteps echoed, each one faster and angrier than the last. The moment the exit door closed behind him, the sound reverberated through the studio like a final punctuation mark, a declaration that the fragile peace between royalty and journalism had finally shattered. The interview, meant to reveal clarity, had instead exposed deeper fractures within Harry, within the media, within perception itself. And the world would soon witness every second of it, dissecting it from every angle, replaying the moment a prince walked away not from royalty, but from his own unraveling.